Paying wages to an old couple, the millionaire cowboy discovered their cabin was an orphan's house. Ethan Cole was not a man who believed in slowing down. Out on the wide, dry plains, people knew him as the Millionaire Cowboy. He had earned that name through years of hard work, long rides, and smart decisions. He owned more land than most people could imagine, and his cattle stretched across miles of open range. But wealth had not made him careless. Ethan still rode his land himself, checking fences, watching the cattle, and making sure everything stayed in order. One late afternoon, while the sun burned low and orange in the sky, Ethan noticed something wrong. A section of fence near the far edge of his property had fallen. The wood was old, broken, and half buried in dust. He sighed quietly and rode closer. As he examined the damage, he noticed something else. A thin trail leading away from the fence, toward a small patch of trees in the distance. It was strange. No one was supposed to live this far out. Curious, Ethan followed the trail. After a short ride, he saw it. A small cabin stood between a few dry oak trees. The roof was worn, the walls cracked, and the door looked like it had not been replaced in years. Smoke rose lightly from the chimney, which meant someone was living there. Ethan frowned. He had bought this land months ago, and no one had mentioned anyone living here. He stepped off his horse and walked toward the cabin. Before he could knock, the door opened slowly. An old man stood there. He was thin, with gray hair and tired eyes, but he stood straight with quiet pride. Behind him, Ethan could see a woman, also old, watching carefully. "Can I help you?" the old man asked. Ethan tipped his hat. "Name's Ethan Cole. I own this land." The old man nodded slowly. "Walter Hart. This is my wife, Mabel. We've been here a long time." Ethan looked around the cabin again. It was clear they had very little. "You know this land was sold?" Ethan asked. Walter gave a small smile. "We heard, but no one came to move us." There was no anger in his voice, just calm truth. Ethan crossed his arms, thinking. "I'm not here to throw you out," he said finally. "But I need to know, how do you manage out here?" Mabel stepped forward, her voice soft. "We grow a little food, fix what we can. It's enough." Ethan didn't believe that fully. The cabin looked too weak and the land around it too dry. Still, he respected their honesty. He thought for a moment, then spoke again. "I've got work that needs doing," he said. "Fence repairs, keeping an eye on cattle near this side of the land." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You offering us a job?" Ethan nodded. "Simple work, nothing heavy. I'll pay you fair wages." The old couple exchanged a glance. It was clear they did not like the idea of help, but they also knew they needed something. Walter finally spoke. "We don't take charity." Ethan gave a small smile. "Good, because I'm not offering charity, I'm offering work." There was a long silence. Then Mabel nodded gently. "All right, we'll do what we can." That was how it began. From that week on, Ethan made it a habit to visit the cabin every few days. He brought tools, checked the land, and paid the couple at the end of each week. At first, everything seemed normal. But slowly, Ethan began to notice small things. There were always more dishes than two people needed. Sometimes he saw tiny footprints in the dirt near the back of the cabin. Not just once, but again and again. One afternoon, he saw a small shoe near the door. It was gone the next day. Ethan said nothing, but his mind stayed busy. Another time, as he rode closer, he thought he heard laughter, children's laughter. But when he reached the cabin, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Walter greeted him as usual, calm and steady. Mabel smiled the same warm smile. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, something was. That evening, as Ethan rode back toward his ranch, he kept thinking about those footprints, about the extra food, about the laughter that disappeared too quickly. He had spent his whole life reading the land, noticing small details others missed, and right now, every sign told him the same thing. The old couple was not living alone, but the question was, why were they hiding it? Ethan Cole was not a man who ignored his instincts. For days after his last visit to the cabin, his mind stayed restless. The small footprints, the extra dishes, the quiet laughter, it all stayed with him. Out on the plains, small details often meant big truths, and Ethan had learned long ago that when something felt wrong, it usually was. So he decided to watch more closely. The next time he rode out to the far side of his land, he made sure to arrive quietly. He slowed his horse long before reaching the cabin and tied it behind a group of trees. From there, he walked, step by step, careful and silent. The wind was soft that day, carrying dust across the ground. The cabin stood still, just like always. No movement, no sound. Ethan waited. Minutes passed. Then he heard it again. A soft sound. Not the wind, not animals. Voices, children. He froze. The sound came from behind the cabin this time. Light whispers, a small laugh, then a quick shh, like someone warning the others to stay quiet. Ethan moved closer, slowly. As he reached the side of the cabin, he saw something that confirmed everything. A small boy ran past the window, just for a second, barefoot, thin, quick, then gone. Ethan stepped back, his heart heavy. So it was true. There were children here, not just one, more. But why would Walter and Mabel hide them? He didn't go in that day. Instead, he walked back to his horse and rode away like nothing had happened. But this time, he had a plan. 2 days later, Ethan returned again, but earlier than usual. The sun had not fully risen yet. The sky was pale and the land felt quiet and cold. This time, he walked straight to the front door and knocked. A moment passed. Then another. Finally, the door opened. Walter stood there, looking surprised. "You're early," he said. Ethan gave a small nod. "Had work nearby." Walter stepped slightly in front of the doorway, as if blocking the view inside. Ethan noticed. "Mind if I come in?" Ethan asked calmly. Walter hesitated, just for a second. Then Mabel's voice came from inside. "Let him in, Walter." Walter stepped aside. Ethan entered the cabin. Everything looked the same at first. Simple table, small fire, old chairs. But now that he was paying attention, he saw more. There were extra blankets in the corner, more plates than before, and near the back wall, small shoes, different sizes. Ethan looked at them, then slowly turned to Walter. The old man said nothing. Mabel stood quietly, her hands folded. Ethan didn't ask any questions. Not yet. He sat down at the table and placed a small bag of money in front of them, their weekly wages. Walter looked at it but didn't touch it. "You're paying too much," Walter said. Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm paying what the work deserves." There was silence again, but this time it felt heavier. Ethan stood up slowly and walked toward the back of the cabin. Walter stepped forward quickly. "That's enough." His voice was firm. Ethan stopped. The two men looked at each other. There was no anger in Ethan's face, but there was something stronger. Truth. "I know," Ethan said quietly. Mabel closed her eyes for a moment. Walter's shoulders dropped slightly. The silence broke. From behind the curtain at the back of the cabin, a small face appeared. A little girl. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and curiosity. Then another child peeked out, and another. Soon, 5 small faces were watching him. Ethan didn't move. He didn't speak loudly. He simply looked at them, then back at Walter and Mabel. "You've been hiding them," he said. Mabel stepped forward slowly. "We were protecting them." Ethan frowned slightly. "From what?" Walter let out a long breath. "From a world that doesn't care." The room felt smaller now. The children stayed close together, unsure what would happen next. Ethan looked at them carefully. They were thin, but not starving. Their clothes were old, but clean. Their eyes, tired, but not broken. This wasn't neglect. This was something else. Something harder. "Who are they?" Ethan asked. Mabel answered softly. "Children with nowhere else to go." Ethan said nothing for a long moment. The fire cracked quietly in the corner. Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, everything had changed. Ethan Cole had come looking for answers, and now, standing in that small cabin, he knew. This was bigger than he ever expected. The cabin felt smaller than ever. Ethan stood in silence, looking at the children. None of them spoke. They stayed close together, watching him carefully, as if they were ready to run at any moment. Walter moved slowly and sat down on a chair. He looked tired now, more than before. "It's time we tell him," Mabel said softly. Walter nodded. Ethan pulled a chair and sat across from them. He kept his voice calm. "Start from the beginning." Mabel took a deep breath. "It began 3 winters ago," she said. "A boy came here, alone, cold, hungry." Ethan glanced at the children. One of the older boys lowered his eyes. "He said he had no family," Walter added. "We gave him food, a place to sleep. We thought he would leave in a few days. But he didn't," Mabel said gently. "And then, another child came." Ethan listened closely. "One by one," Walter continued. "They kept coming. Some were lost. Some ran away from bad places. Some were left behind." The room grew quiet. "We couldn't turn them away," Mabel said. "We tried at first, told ourselves we had nothing to give. But every time we looked at them, We saw fear. Ethan looked at the children again. They were not just hiding. They were surviving. How did you manage? Ethan asked. Walter gave a small, tired smile. We did what we could. Fixed things. Grew a little food. Ate less so they could eat more. Mabel looked at the floor. Some nights we didn't eat at all. Ethan's chest tightened. And the money I gave you? He asked quietly. Walter didn't hesitate. Every coin went to them. Ethan nodded slowly. He had guessed that part, but hearing it felt different. Why hide them? He asked. Mabel answered this time. Because people don't understand. They ask questions. They take children away. Put them in places that are not always kind. Walter added, We're old. We have no papers, no permission. To them, we are just two people breaking rules. Ethan leaned back slightly, thinking. Out on the plains, rules were often simple, but the world beyond was not. He stood up and walked toward the children. They tensed immediately. It's all right, Mabel said gently. He won't hurt you. Ethan stopped a few steps away. What are your names? He asked. No one answered at first. Then the little girl who had peeked out earlier spoke quietly. Lily. Ethan gave a small nod. That's a good name. One by one, the others spoke. Tom. Sarah. Ben. Jake. Emma. 6 children. 6 lives that had somehow found their way to this small, broken cabin. Ethan looked around again. The walls were weak. The roof had cracks. The space was too small. And yet, it was safe. Safer than wherever they had come from. You've been doing this alone? Ethan asked. Walter nodded. We had no choice. Mabel added. We never wanted praise. We just wanted them to be okay. Ethan stayed quiet for a long moment. He walked back to the table and placed his hands on it. All his life, he had built things. Land, business, wealth. But standing here, he realized something. This old couple had built something far more important. Without money, without help, just with kindness. Ethan turned back to them. You should have told me, he said. Walter shook his head. And risk losing them? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He understood now. This was not about hiding secrets. This was about protecting lives. I'm not here to take them away, Ethan said finally. The children looked at him again. Mabel's eyes filled with quiet emotion. Then what will you do? Ethan took a deep breath. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I do know this. He looked around the cabin one more time. This place, it's not enough. Walter frowned slightly. It's all we have. Ethan nodded. I know, and you've done more than anyone could ask. He paused. But they deserve more. The words stayed in the air. More space, more food, more safety, more future. Walter looked down at his hands. Mabel gently held his arm. The children stayed silent, listening. Ethan picked up his hat and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. I'm coming back, he said. Walter looked up. With what? Ethan gave a small, thoughtful look. Something better, he replied. Then he stepped outside. The wind greeted him again, strong and steady. He walked to his horse, but this time, he didn't feel the same as before. Something had changed. He had come to this land thinking it was just another piece of his growing empire, but now he understood. This land held something else, something bigger than cattle, fences, or money. As Ethan rode away, his mind was already working, plans forming, decisions building, because one thing was clear. That cabin was no longer just a place on his land. It was a responsibility, and Ethan Cole was not a man who walked away from responsibility. Not anymore. Ethan Cole did not waste time. The moment he returned to his ranch, he began planning. His mind was clear, and his decision was strong. What he had seen in that small cabin stayed with him. The weak walls, the quiet hunger, and the courage of 2 old people who had given everything for children who were not even their own. That night, Ethan did not sleep much. By morning, he was already giving orders. Workers were called, supplies were gathered, wagons were prepared, wood, tools, food, blankets, everything that was needed. The people at his ranch were surprised. Ethan was known for his business, his cattle, his land deals, but this was different. No one asked questions. They simply followed. 3 days later, a long line of wagons moved across the dry plains toward the old cabin. Dust rose behind them as they traveled. When they arrived, Walter and Mabel stepped outside, confused and worried. Walter frowned. "What is all this?" Ethan stepped down from his horse. "Help." The children stood behind the old couple, watching carefully. Mabel looked at the wagons, then at Ethan. "We didn't ask for this." Ethan nodded. "I know." Walter crossed his arms. "Then why?" Ethan looked at them, his voice calm but firm. "Because you shouldn't have to do this alone." Silence filled the air. The workers began unloading supplies, wood stacked neatly, food placed carefully, tools laid out on the ground. The children watched with wide eyes. Ethan stepped closer. "This cabin," he said, looking around. "It's done its job. But now, it's time for something better." Walter shook his head slightly. "We can't afford this." Ethan gave a small smile. "Good thing you don't have to." Mabel looked at him closely. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan paused. He thought about all the years he had spent building wealth, all the land he owned, all the things he had gained. Then he thought about the small cabin, about the children, about the quiet kindness he had seen. "Because it matters," he said simply. The work began that same day. Old wood was removed carefully. The weak walls were taken down piece by piece. In their place, stronger beams were raised. The small cabin slowly grew. Day by day, it changed. More rooms were added, a proper kitchen, a larger sleeping space, windows that let in light, a roof that could stand against storms. The children watched everything with excitement. At first, they stayed close together, unsure. But slowly, they began to smile more. They helped where they could, carrying small things, cleaning, watching closely as the workers built something new. Ethan visited every day, not as a boss, but as someone who cared. One afternoon, a doctor arrived. Walter looked surprised. "What's this?" "Just checking everyone is healthy," Ethan said. The children were nervous at first, but Mabel stayed with them, calming them one by one. Then, a few days later, a teacher came. Mabel smiled softly. "You thought of everything." Ethan shook his head. "Not everything, just enough to start." Walter stood quietly, watching the changes. "This place," he said slowly, "it's becoming something else." Ethan nodded. "It already was. People just didn't see it." Weeks passed. The building was finally complete. What once was a broken cabin was now a strong, warm home. Not large or fancy, but safe. Very safe. The children had their own beds, clean clothes, regular meals. Laughter filled the air more freely now. Walter and Mabel stood at the front, looking at everything. Mabel wiped her eyes quietly. "I never thought we'd see this day." Walter nodded. "Neither did I." Ethan walked up beside them. "It's not just a house," he said. "It's a place for them to grow." Walter looked at him. "What do we call it?" Ethan thought for a moment. Then he said, "It should carry your name." Mabel looked surprised. "Our name?" Ethan smiled. "You built it first. I only helped." Walter looked at Mabel. She nodded gently. "Heart Haven," Walter said. Ethan nodded. Heart Haven. Time moved forward. Word slowly spread, but not in a way that brought trouble. Ethan made sure everything was done properly. Papers were handled quietly. No one could take the children away unfairly. The place became known as a safe home, a place where children could find care. But for Ethan, it meant something deeper. He still rode across his land. He still managed his business. But now, whenever he passed by that part of the plains, he slowed down. He listened. To laughter. To life. One evening, as the sun set across the horizon, Ethan stopped his horse near Heart Haven. The sky was golden. The children were playing outside. Walter sat nearby, watching them. Mabel stood at the door, smiling. Ethan looked at it all, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something different. Peace. He had spent years building wealth. But here, he had built something that would last longer than money, something real. And as the wind moved gently across the plains, Ethan Cole understood one simple truth. Sometimes, the greatest thing a man can build is not for himself.